Hello and welcome to the tavern. We are sponsored by Mad World. Check them out at www.itsworldmadness.com. Don't miss out. We've got a Tavern X Mad World hoodie on sale now. Let's go ahead and check that out when you get a chance. We are powered by StreamYard as always, so thank you StreamYard for hooking us up. Tonight, we are excited to welcome Liz Entin, author, podcast host, and skeptic-turned-believer in the existence of an afterlife. After the passing of her father, Liz began exploring the possibility of a life beyond death, and her findings have challenged even her own atheism. Today, she shares with us a unique perspective on the scientific evidence for an afterlife. Liz, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
Fantastic. We are very excited to have you on. We've got a big audience ready to hear what you've got to say tonight. Before we get started, would you like to give any kind of shout out or any kind of links that you want people to go check out so they can reach out to you if they enjoyed tonight's episode?
Oh, definitely. So probably see my website scrolling there, which is wtfjusthappened.net. And I'm really active on Instagram, which is just at WTF_just_happened. And you can link to all that on my website too. So
Awesome.
hope to hear from any of you.
Absolutely. And if y'all need any of that information, it will be in the show notes afterwards. So you'll be able to find all those details anywhere that you're checking this out after the show goes live. You'll be able to find those. Landon, what's up, buddy? How you doing tonight?
Hey, I'm Landon. Yeah, I'm doing great. We are also powered by StreamYard.
Yes, I said that.
Oh, I didn't hear that. But I just want to chime
in. You just wanted to get that in a second time. So we got quite a bit of questions for you tonight. I don't know that we're going to get through all of them. We tend to overwrite questions ahead of time. But let's open up with the first one. Can you share with us your personal journey of examining the evidence of an afterlife and how that has changed your perspective on life and death?
You have like 3 hours?
Right?
That's okay. So I will do a summarized version. So interestingly, I heard you guys said I'm a believer in the afterlife, and I wouldn't say that's actually accurate. I think there's a preponderance of evidence that would make it a possible, highly likely conclusion, which is seriously better than assuming that it's absolutely impossible, which is what I originally thought. I think it's the most likely explanation given all I've researched, but I'm not 100% convinced. And to give a long story short, the very first thing I found, it was kind of a desperate shot in the dark. And my first thought was, okay, let's say consciousness is created by our brain neurons, and that happened once. Now, why could that never happen again? It wouldn't necessarily be myself, but it would be another human in maybe a couple hundred years that still would be an experience of a self, which is better than total obliteration, which is what I thought at the time. So the very first person I found was a child psychiatrist called Dr. Jim Tucker, and he is also a professor at the University of Virginia, and he researches cases of kids with past life memories, and from a very science-based perspective. And so I discovered him, and I started to delve into his studies and was just like, what the fuck? This is crazy. And then from there, I found a whole department at the University of Virginia that is studying various evidence of an afterlife from a very science-based perspective. So that was the very first thing, and that opened up my whole research.
Okay. So when you say they have memories of a past life, can you give a little more detail on that? That sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's really crazy. It's so interesting. So I guess one of his most famous cases, I can discuss that. It's the James Leininger case. And there was a little boy who started to, I mean, it's so in depth. I'm just, again, going to give a brief summary, but really worth getting into in some of Dr. Tucker's books and studies. So he started having, I was about 3 years old, and he started having just trauma-based nightmares. And he would scream, plane on fire, little man go down, plane on fire, little man go down. And he kept drawing about plane crashes, and he would call himself James 3, and they thought he was James, and he's 3 years old. And after a lot of research, well, for example, he had these dolls and he named one had red hair, one black hair, and I guess one blonde hair, and he gave them each a different name, and they were little like male dolls.
Yeah.
And he also went to an exhibit on different planes, and he knew all these details about planes. There were no pilots in his family, just stuff he could not know. That's when they found Dr. Jim Tucker. This boy was like playing. He said his dreams and his play was the way children who experience real trauma play in this sort of obsessive way. So it was like he was processing a trauma.
Yeah.
And lots of research, they traced him to a person also called James, who had passed away, hence the James 3, because this boy's father in this life was also called James. So he's like, I'm the third James. I was James, then my dad's James, I'm James again. And after a lot of research, they found the man who he was. The dolls matched the names of people who'd been in his Air Force troop. There was one with blonde hair, one with red hair, one with brown or black hair, and it matched the names. He met his old Air Force buddies who are now 70. They shared some memories, and it was just insane. That was just one of many cases. That's the strongest, but there were others that were verified that way.
Yeah.
They never talk about karma. They don't talk about, the spirituality that you often hear of talk about reincarnation. And they don't even really use the word reincarnation. It's just cases of kids with past life memories.
Yeah.
And this is one of many cases. So I just started really delving into that.
So I heard a very interesting perspective on like reincarnation, for example, was that imagine you are a celestial consciousness, that you are a celestial spirit or whatever, and you're given the opportunity to come to Earth and inhabit a body for a very short amount of time, like a speck in the cosmos. 100 years, if you're lucky, is a speck in time, And they're like, wouldn't you do it? Because if not, like, how do you experience all of that, happiness, sadness, the anger, all of these emotions and feelings that you get to experience while being alive? So as this cosmic entity, if you were given that opportunity, you'd want to go back and experience that again. So it almost feels like it could be recycled. As once you're gone, you're back in the queue waiting for your next chance to come back and experience that little blip of happiness or sadness or anger or whatever it was. And I don't know, I thought that was a cool perspective. I thought it was an interesting little take on that.
That is an interesting take. Yeah, I never quite heard it that way, but I like that. That makes it very fun. Like we're here playing a game or having an experience, which, life can get stressful. So that makes it sound a lot more fun.
I thought it was pretty cool. I mean, like if you could imagine there being some sort of, supreme creator, and it's like, hey, you're up. You want to go back? And you're like, yeah, I want to go back. I get to experience all of those things that makes life amazing. Absolutely, I want to go back. Let me have my shot again. I didn't get to do this last time. I would love to go back. And I just think it was a very interesting perspective. So our next question is, it's covering. There it goes. How do you reconcile your skepticism and atheism with the evidence that you have found for an afterlife?
Okay, well, I'll start first with atheism. Evidence that our consciousness is not created by a brain and is some form of non-local that we haven't identified yet, that somehow exists in a cloud and downloads and, for lack of better words, quantum entangles with the brain. That has nothing to do with God. I mean, to jump to say that consciousness is not created by a brain, there's a God. I mean, that's just a huge leap. I just don't even think the two have anything to do with each other. There possibly be God. I mean, I'm so shocked by everything I discovered. I won't say I know for a fact, but I have seen zero evidence that the answer is God and one supreme consciousness that created all of this. The only thing that seems to be evidence is a lot of phenomena that happens that is not explicable if our consciousness is created by a brain. And the best conclusion seems to be that our consciousness is downloaded by a brain and continues after our bodies have died and existed before. Now, skepticism, that just means you don't really, ideally, I mean, there's a lot of skeptics that some people would refer to as ardent disbelievers. So skepticism just means you don't really believe stuff. You examine, you want evidence. Maybe I should say I'm an evidentialist. But
Oh, I like that.
yeah,
You're
but
right. A lot of people, I think, they misunderstand skepticism, because I think with everything in life, you need to be a little bit skeptical, because if not, you're going to be fooled. It comes down to
right.
everything. You need to be in a mindset of asking questions and wanting to know the why and how behind something, where you just got the wool pull over your eyes over everything. So I don't think being a skeptic is necessarily a bad thing, and I think it gets a little twisted sometimes in people's perspectives.
I agree. Yeah. I think it's about wanting evidence. I think it's about not believing without having a reason to in an ideal way. I mean, you hear something, you're not just like, oh, I believe that. I mean,
Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff studying this. People just say, and I'm like, well, why would I believe that? Like, you're asking me just to believe, and you're providing no reason, no evidential reason. And so I just think I've concluded this based on skepticism and evidence rather than belief.
exactly.
That makes sense.
And
Yeah.
and I don't want to discredit anyone who believes, but for example, I am a Christian, but
Okay.
at the end of the day, I understand the want for more knowledge, and that I have a much more logical brain. So even though I believe, I can completely understand where someone comes from wanting more evidence, because a lot of it does come down to just blind faith, and that's not for everybody. And it's one of those things where everyone has a unique perspective on it. And so, are skeptics atheists? Ooh, that is a good question. Are skeptics atheists? I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't think that's how. I think it's a bad way to. I'll let you take this one.
I think they can be. They don't have to be. Someone could believe in a God and be, I would be surprised if everybody doesn't have some areas they just live by belief and some areas they question. So I think that they could be skeptical and questioning loads of things and being like, oh, I don't believe that. I'm skeptical of this. I'm skeptical of that. But religion happens to be one area where they're just belief based.
Yeah. Landon, what's up, buddy?
I was going to basically say about the same thing. Depends on the subject that you're talking about. You could be skeptical about many different things, but when you're possibly skeptic about religion, then it's possible you're either open-minded, you could be an atheist, or agnostic of sorts. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're an atheist just because you're skeptical of the religion.
Exactly. And honestly, Oh, go ahead. I apologize.
Oh, no, sorry. Go on. I interrupted you.
I was going to say, some of the strongest religious people are very skeptical, and especially if they're very serious about their religion, they're going to question those things and look for answers. So, I mean, if you don't look for those answers, how can you say that you're truly, that invested in your religion? You should be questioning and looking for things to help back up your beliefs.
Right. And you can be skeptical of other things. You could be, maybe you don't even examine. Maybe you take religion, you're just like, I believe it. This is what I was raised with. And it's important to you, which, there's absolutely nothing wrong with. I don't want anyone to think I have a problem with religion just because I'm not religious. But you could be completely skeptical of other things. You could be like, I question, take anything. You could live as a fairly skeptical person, like not trusting what's presented to you in many other ways. So
absolutely great question, audience, by the way. I really appreciate that. That was a good one. What are some of the most compelling pieces of scientific evidence that you have encountered that suggest an afterlife may exist?
Well, I gave the one of Dr. Tucker, and he also had a mentor who's passed away, Dr. Ian Stevenson, the cases of kids with past life memories. I'll give a few. Another is mediumship. There are psychic mediums who are getting studied for levels of accuracy. They're being studied under strict controls, which eliminates any chance of cheating, any chance of cold reading. And they're doing a place called Windbridge, which is founded by Dr. Julie Beischel and Mark Bacuzzi. They study mediums, putting them up to quintuple blinded studies, and they're getting accurate results significantly beyond the odds of chance, knowing things like personalities to deceased loved ones, relationship to the sitter, memories, age they passed away. And only a small percent of mediums are that accurate, but you only need a small percent
Yeah.
be good at it to show that consciousness could survive. And then there's near-death experiences. That's another one I think is really strong. And that's when people pass away and they're resuscitated. And I think as medicine gets better and better, we're going to get more of those. And some of the evidence that comes back is remarkable. I mean, they claim being out of their body, they see things, they have sensory input. One aspect I think is fascinating is called peak in Darien, and a lot of them will report seeing deceased loved ones, but some will report seeing someone they had not known had passed away, and they will be confused about why they're there with their deceased loved ones, and then they'll find out when they come back that the person had passed away. They'll be told things like, they might say, let's say they see their deceased grandfather, the grandfather might be like, oh, I put this paper in this drawer, and then it's verified. And this isn't frequent, but it happens enough. And again, if you just have this happen a few times, that's evidence.
Yeah, very true. I like that. I know I watched, I can't remember what the name of the thing was that I watched, but it was the perspective of people who had died and been brought back, and a lot of them said they experienced that same out-of-body experience, and they were able to, like, as if they were watching themselves on the operating table, down to pinpoint accuracy, describe what had happened to them while they were completely biologically, scientifically dead for all of, like, let's say 5 minutes or whatever, however long it took, and they were able to tell exactly what had happened to them because they saw it from that third perspective. And that, to me, is insane. They had one lady who she died, and when they brought her back, she immediately was like, go to, I don't know, it was like the third floor, second room, because she's going to jump out the window of this building. And they're like, what? And she's like, go, like, right now. So they go, and sure enough, one of the patients on the opposite side of the hospital is getting ready to jump out of the window, and she saved her from committing suicide. Like, what? How do you explain that?
That is amazing. Yeah. And you start hearing more and more stories like that. And some are funny. Like this one I just think is funny. This one man was being resuscitated and he passed away on the operating table. They resuscitated him and he came back and he said to the doctor, this is really weird. Why are you flapping your arms like you were a bird? And the doctor, apparently he would tuck his hands under his armpits after he sanitized his hands and use his elbows to point at his assistants and the nurses because he thought it kept his hands more sanitary. So when he had to actually go in for the surgery, it kept his hands sanitized. So he would be like this, and someone floating above was like, he looks like a chicken. So that was, some of them are funny. So
I know that I've come to, I guess, near death myself. I suffocated on my own vomit on the middle of the interstate at like 4:00 in the morning. I tried to Heimlich myself, and it wasn't working. I literally fell to the ground and blacked out, saw nothing but blackness, and somehow or another, it came, and I was, it's brought back in. But I've actually had dreams where I've met my Mima who died, and as well as my mother who's died, both a year to the day of their death is when they came back. And they would tell me stuff of the future that I'm not supposed to know, I guess. And it always came out very wonky, like, so I think that's kind of interesting as well.
That's amazing. That's, it's so interesting. The more people I talk about, I mean, you're not writing books about this, talk about this publicly. The more people I talk with this topic about, more will just personally just say, hey, I have this one weird thing, and it'll be little stories like that. And it seems so many people have that type of experience.
Landon's always had a more, I guess, a spiritual connection, to that kind of thing. So he's an interesting one for sure. How do you respond to skeptics who dismiss the evidence for an afterlife as anecdotal or unscientific?
I mean, I think that's the really reasonable conclusion until they start examining it. If they're curious, I mean, I did the exact same thing. And also, I mean, people have a right to think what they want. It doesn't really affect me. You know, I mean, if they're curious to discuss it, I'm more than happy to discuss it. If they're in grief as well and are like, I just can't believe this, there's no way, I'll give them as much time as they need to sit and talk about it. But otherwise, like, I think that's a really logical conclusion. I mean, it's really weird, like how, because we can't figure out how the mechanism works. Like, how does consciousness, like, what substance is it, and how does this work? How does it download into a brain? So I think it's a reasonable conclusion, and you know, it doesn't really affect me what other people conclude. Like, this is really some of the most complicated questions of the universe. Like, people can, of course, very logically think whatever they'd like, and
I love the way that you describe it as like downloading into a brain, because that it makes a lot of sense in the era that we live in, and it's a great way to describe it to someone who may not necessarily understand what you're trying to convey to them. But everyone knows how you download something from the cloud. You know, that makes sense in this generation. So that's a wonderful way, I think, to describe it.
Yeah, that's what it seems to be. Some substance that is similar to a cloud that we don't really understand. I mean, a few data scientists probably do understand how the cloud works, but the average person doesn't. And I guess it's the same model where information's stored and then downloads to brains.
I think that is probably the most logical conclusion. If you're on the fence of, is there a supreme creator or not, and let's say you're closer to that not side, that is a very logical way to understand that topic, is that it works like the cloud and you're downloading content. I love the concept of how that works. It makes a lot of sense. We're going to move on to this next one here. I'm going to try to get one more question in before Landon pops in with his big one. How do you approach the topic of an afterlife with those who may be experiencing grief or struggling to come to terms with mortality?
Well, because I've been in the same position, I came to this through grief. I try to tailor it a little bit to each person. Everyone, I think, needs to hear it their own way. I'll just say, I'm an atheist. I like to tell people I'm an atheist, not to disrespect religion, but whatever someone's religious beliefs, I hope it gives them some hope that someone who thinks like me thinks there's an afterlife. So that's one of the reasons I like to tell people I'm an atheist, rather than having any disrespect for someone else's beliefs. And then I'll say, depending on each one, there is a bunch of data. I have come to think there's an afterlife after my own grief. And, do you have questions? Let's talk about it. And I'm happy to sit if they need to hear a little more of my personal experiences that I've had, such as medium readings. Do they more want to hear about quintuple blinded studies I read about? Do they want me to give them resources? And I'll just talk through and see what they need and let them ask questions and talk. However, I think each one of us needs to process information our own way. So I try to meet them there and share that I came to this the exact same way.
I love the level of respect that you give for it, because you said meet them halfway, and you don't do it from a point of, well, this is my belief, so you got to believe it. It's more of a, hey, this is why I believe and where I'm coming from. So regardless of where you're coming from, if you need some help, I'm willing to offer what I know and what I'm willing to do. And it works so well with, being on this particular show, because we're all about inclusiveness and just love for each other. So it's nice that, like a Christian and an atheist can sit down and have a conversation about the afterlife and end up both with smiles on our face and talking and hearing both perspectives. I think it's just super neat. What's up, Landon? What you got, buddy?
Well, I'm sure that my family doesn't like to hear that I don't actually practice Christianity. I practice Druidry. So, the spirituality side, like Brandon was saying, I'm very big into it. I believe that we are all connected in some manner of energy and life source. So it also coincides with the conscious mind, that you had talked about. And like Brandon was saying as well, I do love and respect that, you don't come to talking with different people from, being an atheist is, forcing this upon you, but it's more of a conversation. And I think that people in all spectrums of religion and spirituality, if we could just have a conversation, we would have a better understanding of the people that we are talking to about this subject.
Yes.
right?
I-
So, yeah,
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
No,
You're
I was just
good.
gonna say, I think how the universe was created and how our consciousness exists is one of the most complicated questions, and that you wouldn't like a person because they concluded differently. That just I can't even begin to understand why
Yeah.
you wouldn't like a person over something like that, or think that they have to conclude about you as long as they're respectful. And I mean, these are really complicated questions. It'd be
Yeah. Well,
ridiculous to be like, you have to think the universe was created the same way I do, or I won't like you. I mean, that's insane to me.
Yeah, that's insane.
there's a saying I like to say. I guess it's a little mean, but everybody opinions are like assholes. Everyone has one, and
Yep.
some of them stink.
Yeah.
But for our last question here, which it's gotten used on me at least 3 different times now, and they've tripped me up with my own question here. So the question is, what is one question that you wish we would have asked you, and how would you have answered that question?
Okay, so a question maybe that would have been interesting to ask is there anything now that would make me change my mind back to assuming there's no afterlife?
Nice.
Yeah. And my answer is physics would come up with an explanation for all the phenomena that I have seen that I cannot explain, that I've concluded it seems like there's an afterlife, and they would have an answer, and the answer is not an afterlife.
Hmm.
So you would need a really hardcore scientific based, hey, cut and dry, we figured it out kind of thing.
Yes. Yes.
Oh,
And that's
okay.
still not 100% because science always builds upon itself and grows and changes. And yesterday's facts are today's fiction, and it evolves and evolves.
Well, it's like they brought up. They tried to find the soul and how much the soul actually weighs. So they were testing people who were on death's door and setting them down on a giant scale until they died. And it actually came up as like 34 kilograms, I think is what they were saying, something like that. I don't remember the whole study or whatever, but I found it very interesting that people were doing that.
Yeah, they had a pretty cool, like a pretty solid, database to say, hey, the soul has weight, and I thought that was an interesting conclusion to come to.
Yeah, I read about it. I don't remember the number. My guess would be, again, I think it's more of like a type of quantum entanglement from a cloud. My guess is that as you pass, like, probably other layers of like air and lungs and claps, my guess is it comes to more of a physical reason for why you weigh less. That's what I would conclude about that.
I like that you used the quantum entanglement theory.
Yeah.
So my belief is that we all come from source energy, right? The tree of life, and that we are born from the fruit of the tree that falls to us into bodies, right? Which is the fruit would be the soul, And once the body is gone, the soul moves back to source energy, which, as I would think, it would be quantum entanglement as well. That's great. I just want to say, I wish we had more time to continue on this. This is a very big subject, and it goes quite down to the rabbit hole, Alice. But thank you for being here. We loved having you. This is the type of stuff that we like to listen to, hear about, learn more about, because it is a teaching thing as well. To our audience, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening to us. Thanks for taking the time. Make sure you go and follow us on Facebook. We're on every major platform for podcasts. So if you can't find it anywhere, you're not looking.
True. I also want to reiterate that thank you so much, Liz, for being on our show tonight. We really enjoyed this conversation. We're definitely going to have to get you back on because we had a lot more questions planned, but 30 minutes just is never really long enough for something, especially like this. But thank you so much. Do you have any closing statements for our audience tonight?
Just first of all, thank you so much for having me. This was really fun questions. I love getting to think, and it was just a really fun conversation. And I guess closing comments for the audience: if any of you are in grief, whatever your beliefs, like, it's hard. There's real evidence, and it's worth at least considering. You don't have to have a final conclusion, but it's if you're hopeful but it seems almost impossible, at least give it a look. Let yourself do that. That doesn't mean you have to have a final answer.
Absolutely, I agree. It's worth digging into and finding out more information, because life is too short to expect a final answer on everything, but it's never too short to question and learn, because that's what we're built for, is learning. And I think once you stop questioning things and learning, that's kind of when you die, whether or not you actually died or not, because your brain is built to learn. And if you start giving up, well, I mean, what do you got left if you're not at least experiencing life? And learning is a huge part of experiencing.
Preach it, brother.
I want to give a shout out to all of our family over on Reality. We love you guys. Everybody listening out there on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, thanks for watching. All of our Tavern family, we really, really, really love you guys. Honestly, love you, mean it. Thanks for stopping by, guys. We really appreciate you. Go ahead and check out the www.wtfjusthappened.net. You can reach out and talk with Liz and get more information if you liked tonight's episode. And as always, thanks for stopping by the Tavern.